Growing up, my brother, Roger, has always been, to say it as kindly as possible. He had a very strange obsession with anything horror. Which is fine, but his obsession took him to very unfathomable depths in his head. My parents sought so much therapy for him as a child. Even mental hospitals, medications, until one day, as late teenagers, he mellowed out completely. He was what society could deem normal. And this went on until he left home and my parents could breathe and not fear judgment from their high class peers again. I grew up in a very bougie setting. The finest clothes, the finest schools, the finest foods, you name it. My family had money. They had one well-mannered dream child, which was me. I did everything expected of me. Their daughter who was everything they wanted a little girl to look. And I knew no other way. Then their other child, which I just described, Roger. Poor Roger. I always did pity him. My parents, well, my whole family, did not know how to manage him. He was not a bad child, just different. When all methods had failed to normalize him, they resorted to thinking maybe beating the strangeness out of him would work. The beatings were brutal, getting worse with each new obsession he would gain. Broken bones, massive bruises, cuts and lacerations. I remember the blood they spilled from him. I wept every night, praying to make them stop. All I could ask was why. My father even said to me, if I ever mentioned a word of them normalizing my brother, they would beat me and send me away. So I maintained reticence out of fear. When we turned 18, my brother vanished. I never knew what happened. That is, until 7 years later, I received a message request on Facebook during my lunch break. It was from, to my surprise, Roger. Hey C's, it's been so long. How have you been? I invited the whole family over to my place for Thanksgiving. Hope you can join us. Hope you respond. It was a rather short and informal invitation. I assumed he didn't know what to say after a couple of years. Nonetheless, I was overjoyed to hear from him. So I immediately gave him my response, of course. Just tell me the time and place, and I'll be there. He instantly responded with, great. Then gave me his address, while wanting to catch up briefly. I told him I was working as an editor for a magazine, and finally got my own penthouse, mostly filling him in on what I've done with my life. Morizo emphasizing how much I've missed and worried about him. Oddly enough, I've searched for years, ever since Facebook became a thing. I hope to find him. He found me. I was so relieved to know he was alright and living comfortably somewhere that he can be free to express himself without our family cruelly judging him. I had the week of Thanksgiving off, so I decided to make my homemade sweet potato pie to bring to the Thanksgiving dinner. The drive to my brother's house was nerve-wracking. I hadn't seen him in years, and I was getting emotional. His home was a small house, 1 bed and 1 bath with a large fenced-in backyard. There was a beat-up old pickup truck in his dirt driveway, not in the best conditions, but at least my brother had a place of his own and a job to maintain. I knocked on the door. I was elated when my brother opened the door, but that quickly faded when I saw his physical appearance. His hair was long and disheveled with a beard to match. His clothes faded with a few holes in them. He was barefoot. But what was most shocking of all was the fact that he had casts on both his forearms. Roger, I couldn't think of the words to say. I was so confused and disheartened by his appearance. He frowned. Well, I may not have the best clothes, but I'm clean and don't stink. What happened to your arms? That's when he gave me a warm smile. You always were the only one that cared if I had any injuries. Come in. I followed him inside to the smell of food greeting me. His home was simple with a few pieces of essential furniture. He politely took the pie I was holding to put it in the refrigerator and begged me to sit on the couch. Where is everyone? I asked him. They'll be here a little later. It's just you and me for right now, he answered. I felt very awkward and out of sorts. Something just seemed off, and I couldn't think of why. I guess it is my brother's appearance. He has a home, money for the utilities, especially water as I heard the kitchen sink running, and he looks like Tarzan. Completely unkempt. Had his mental state gotten to the point that he didn't want to take care of himself properly, especially groom himself? Do you need help in the kitchen? I asked. No thanks, I got most of it done. I'm just heating up a few things and cleaning, he answered. So what have you been doing lately? Various jobs. Mostly temp stuff. I was working for a construction company for 3 years, but my hours got cut. Oh, I said. However, that story didn't make sense, but I refused to call him out on it. I suppose he was too embarrassed to tell me that perhaps he got fired or he got injured, which I assumed was why his arms were bandaged. We chit-chatted for a while, catching up until he told me to come to the table. He had set up the table with a lot of meats, very little vegetables, and pies. He placed a bottle of wine next to the turkey while handing me a wine glass. I was very confused at this point. I sat down in my seat while he took the head of the table. Shouldn't we wait till everyone else arrives? I asked. Don't worry about it. You should know they've always been fashionably late for everything. Remember? Roger said as calmly and unnerving as anything I've ever heard him be. Fix yourself a plate. I know you're hungry. Well, shouldn't we say the prayer? Roger brushed me off. Bit hypocritical for our family to pray, don't you think? Makes me question what god our family really worshipped. His tone had hints of anger and malice in it. I know it still bothers you, I began. Bothers me? He laughed. You become the only black sheep, you get slaughtered. Not realizing I'm still a sheep of the herd. Only I was merely a tender lamb for the sacrifice, so our family could maintain their high standing among majestic stallions. I just took a sip of my wine, becoming frightened. My sister, you don't realize that however you may be kind, you still had the ability to stop it. But you didn't. Roger, I was just a little child scared to death. But you still chose silence. He said so menacingly. Not only that, as you got older, you chose the lavishes of our parents' wealth and your school popularity and admiration, that you forgot about me, stopped caring and kept quiet. I realize now this was just for him to confront me. I couldn't be angry. He endured a lot of pain, and if this helped him heal, I would let him say whatever he needed to say. He was also right. Though I felt incredibly guilty and ashamed, I never spoke up. You want to know a hard truth? He continued. Something you have no clue of for 7 years. I could only remain quiet. He took a deep breath. I was their firstborn. They choose to not put me on their will, as if I never existed. They were that disgusted by me. When I left home, they constantly tormented me. They found me at every shelter I've been in for 7 years, sending me horrible letters of how they were ashamed of me, that they'll never help me, and that I was the biggest mistake of their lives. I had various jobs just to survive, and every family member chose to somehow get me fired, so I couldn't make any money, just so I can have food to eat. I've slept on benches, entryways, parking lots. I remember nights where a member of our family stalked me, just to call the cops on me for sleeping where they could find me. But the list goes on. Simply explained, they made it a mission in their lives to make sure I suffer. I was completely mortified and only stared at him in shock. I even had the courtesy to text our loving parents to come to dinner for Thanksgiving. The only reply I got was that I was not their son and for me to rot in hell. But I knew you wouldn't refuse. But I'd make sure they'd attend dinner, one way or the other. I had no clue what he meant by that last statement. So, they're coming? I asked. He looked at me and nodded. Sure are. He gave a grin that sent chills down my spine. Don't give me such a look. Here, eat something. I spent days getting this meal just right. I looked at the food in front of me. I started with the turkey. I began carving a piece of the breast when I noticed something strange inside the bird. There were herbs and garlic cloves, but also what appeared to be part of a liver. Did you use the gizzards to stuff the turkey? Among other things, Roger said coolly. My heart was getting stuck in my throat and my guts tightened. Something felt so off and so unsettling. Roger just sat there frighteningly calm waiting for me to finish making my plate. The gizzards in the turkey were too large for them to come from a 16-pound bird. I set my sight on the rhubarb pie. I cut a slice. As I pulled it up, I noticed a clump of hair and a tooth. I dropped my plate and yelled at Roger, "What the hell is happening? What have you done?" They got what they deserved. He roared, which made me weak at the knees. They were the monsters. What have you done? I cried. I broke into all their houses and brutally beat them the way they had beaten me. I tortured them as they tortured me. They would not stop tormenting me until they were sure I was dead. They stole my childhood, and they were stealing my life. Only way I'd ever be free is if they were dead. Do you understand? Why didn't you go to the police and say what? Technically they have not committed crimes towards an adult. And don't you know that money talks and bullshit walks? A homeless man against rich assholes. But this house, home invasion. The owner's dead. I was horrified and hysterical. I knew my brother was traumatized, but I didn't know to this extent. Even how our family had pushed him over the edge. They completely destroyed him, bringing out the monster from his fantasies. The family is all here. My brother laughed. He pointed to the ham. There's Uncle Terrence. Then pointed to the green bean casserole. There's Aunt Hannah. He did this with each dish on the table. But for dear mommy and daddy, they got the specialty. The masterminds behind my failing and unwanted life. I snuck into their $1 million home as they slept in their bed made for a king. Tied them up and carried them away here. I beat them, scorched their skin, whipped them with a leather belt till the skin was ripped off, waterboarded them, basically everything they did to me. To insult them even more, I cut the skin off my arms and shoved it down their throats. They were going to accept I was their flesh and blood, even if they had to literally choke on that fact. They were going to accept me. I was screaming and sobbing hysterically. My legs were shaking and everything didn't feel real. And as for you, dear sister, who chose to not say anything, the one who cold stopped their abuse and put me in a loving home. He said, right before he hit me on the head with something, and I blacked out. I came to, though my vision was still blurry. I was tied up, and my mouth was being held open by some sort of makeshift contraption. I saw my brother sharpening a large cleaver. Since you chose silence, silent you will stay, he said. I screamed as loud as I could when a knock on the door stopped us both. Open up, it's the police. My brother panicked and tried to run for it, but the front door was knocked down. The police saw me tied up, and the outcome for Roger was predictable. An officer came to my rescue, while the other two chased Roger. The next couple of weeks was such a whirlwind. I was taken in for questioning, and I told them everything. I was told in return that Roger had ended his life before the two officers caught him. Though Roger may have completely lost his mind, and he dealt with the pain in his own way, I feel so guilty and responsible for it. If only I had said something sooner. He was different. But he wasn't a monster. Our family made him into one. And my silence only added the fuel. All he had known was pain and hatred. Though it's too late now, I've learned my lesson. And I decided to be an advocate against bullying and abuse of all forms. I will never be afraid or too selfish to speak up again.